The Data Collectors. Written by Danielle Palli. Narrated by Graham Mack and Danielle Palli. 22. Sanctuary. Monday evening, 5 years after the assembly. Between Mr. Sparks telling her that the royals were trying to kill her, an unusual visit from Tanager and Cepheus, who, for all she knew, could have been the royals, and Fatima's new alien romance, she needed to clear her head. She made her way to the Singing River Sanctuary, but not before leaving a note in Ivan's mailbox to meet her in the Serenity Garden at the church as soon as possible, but not to tell anyone where he was going and who he was going to see. She signed it, Kermit's Mom, in the hopes that he would for once actually check his mail on time, and that he would realize it was she who made the request. A series of ivy-draped trellises surrounded the gardens with a fountain composed of planets orbiting the sun. At its base was a circle of people, animals, and mythical creatures standing together in unity collecting water that flowed from each of the planets into the pool of water at the bottom. Around the fountain were 4 stone benches, etched with names: stillness, quietude, tranquility, and peace. Branching out from the centre were 4 shell pathways. Between each was a variety of native plants: buteberry, fire bushes, oyster plants, and mully grass. Lucene sat on the quietude bench in hopes that it would calm her racing mind. She assessed what she knew so far. In a matter of days, she had met 4 strange men, all of whom seemed out of place with their surroundings and, based on their behaviour and wild claims, possibly psychotic. One claimed she, herself, was born from alien parents, and all 4 seemed to think she was special, and as such was in great danger. She knew she had irrational fears, being tracked or controlled via phones, car computers, laptops, and other GPS systems. Red doors scared the bejesus out of her, and it didn't matter if they were attached to a house, a car, or something else. She had wild gaps in her memory, and, if she were being honest with herself, the real reason she didn't tell Fatima about her life in New York wasn't so much about privacy as it was that she simply didn't have the full picture. She remembered pieces of it: the car accident, certain days working at the UC, the awesome falafel food truck near Times Square. Furthermore, if she were being even more honest with herself, she could swear that the tree-like tattoos on her arm were starting to change shape.
Lucene, I did not expect to see you today, particularly after staying late to help me with the celebration on Sunday.
Lucene lurched a moment in her seat, before realizing who it was. Today, Isabella wore her long white hair in tight braids, with a large brimmed straw hat covering her head. For once, instead of her usual flowing attire, she was actually wearing green linen pants with a matching button-down shirt. In her hands she carried pruning shears, gloves, and a bucket.
Hi, Reverend Isabella.
Lucene greeted her quietly. Maybe quietude was working.
Lucene, I've told you before, you don't need to call me Reverend outside of ceremony. Isabella is just fine.
She sat on the peace bench and crossed her legs, revealing tan sandals with laces that crisscrossed up her calves.
If I may inquire what brings you here today on your day off? Well,
Lucene thought for a moment.
Fatima's family is in town, and they have very, boisterous personalities. Yes, I can see that.
Reverend Isabella smiled.
I thought since the sanctuary rooms are not in use at the moment, perhaps I can stay in one of them for a few days. You could take it out of my pay, of course. Of course, you're welcome to sleep here as long as you need. I have no intention of taking it out of what little I pay you as it is.
She laughed.
If anything, your staying will give me some relief if walk-ins need refuge. Thank you, Isabella.
Lucene responded sincerely. Isabella rose to go, but before she did, she looked down at Lucene and said,
However, in the future, it is completely acceptable to answer a question with, I would rather not say. There's no need to fabricate a story.
Lucene blushed and nodded. Isabella continued,
If I may inquire what brings you here today on your day off?
Her violet eyes looked straight into Lucene's.
I'd rather not say. Exactly,
Reverend Isabella answered, and started down one of the pathways, carefully lifting her feet to avoid bits of broken shell from collecting in her sandals.
The kitchen is open to you should you need to store anything in the refrigerator. I lock up at 9, but you can let yourself in and out with your key.
Lucene stared into the fountain.
Thank you, Isabella. You are wonderful. Yes, I know I am.
Isabella smiled.
As we all are.
Lucene had just about given up on Ivan showing when she suddenly spotted a mop of red hair cutting through the dark and heard the shuffling of feet from around the corner. She gave him a wave, but remained quiet. Timed lights resembling multicoloured fireflies lit up the bushes as the sun went down. "Aye, Lucene!" Ivan gave an awkward wave as he approached. "Turns out I can't enter a church without getting struck by lightning." He laughed at his own joke, but then coughed when he caught sight of Lucene's lightning-stricken arms. Sorry. That went different in my head." Lucene smiled.
It's okay, Ivan. I get the joke.
Ivan stood at the fountain and scratched under his chin. "So, I got your note." Lucene nodded. After waiting through a long pause for a question that didn't come, she continued.
I'm really worried, and I wasn't sure who to talk to.
"Phew!" Ivan let out a sigh. "I'm so glad you said that. I've been worried too." He kicked the base of the fountain with his toe, absent-mindedly, before catching Lucene's questioning look. He pulled his foot back and blushed. He really didn't know how to behave in churches, or anywhere where social norms were expected to be kept.
You have?
Lucene asked. "Aye, this Roman fella shows up out of nowhere and tries to hooch up to Fatima. I don't trust him, I tell you."
Ivan, that's not what I'm talking about.
"It's not?" He tugged at his earlobe. "Then what?"
How well do you know Tanager and Cepheus?
She asked. "Well, Tanager are only just met, but Cepheus and I have been corresponding for over a year now."
Corresponding?
"Aye, in an online technology board."
But how long have you known them in person?
Ivan calculated on his fingers and looked upward as if trying to remember. "Since, Friday evening."
So 3 nights ago, the same night Cepheus wigged out and showed up in my bedroom trying to steal my cat?
"Aye. I thought that was weird myself, but Tanager explained it to me."
And what explanation would that be?
"He went through a bad trauma, lost his wife and kids, and that just broke him. Random triggers set him off, and he can't seem to adjust his human-like state with his lizard one. Poor fella."
And it doesn't concern you having him in your house in such a fragile state?
"Nah, everybody's been through something." Somehow that answer seemed very reasonable to Ivan, but not at all acceptable to Lucene. Surprising, given her random outbursts and aversions to red doors and computers. There was another long silence. Ivan stared into the fountain, almost mesmerized, as if he were trying to figure out the mechanics of how it worked.
They think I'm an alien, you know,
Lucene said, matter-of-factly. Ivan answered, and after a long pause added, "That makes sense."
It does?
"Aye. You're as eccentric as the lot of them, so it stands to reason you're having trouble adjusting to life on this planet. Did it ever occur to you that maybe you didn't belong here? Originally, I mean. Of course you belong here now, but..." He stumbled over his words.
I get it.
Lucene held up a hand.
And I guess so. I knew I didn't quite fit in, but why would someone want to kill me?
She looked at the ground, contemplating this. "Say what now? Kill you?"
I went to meet Mr. Sparks after Roman mentioned to Fatima that he needed to speak with him about research.
I knew it would get back to that guy. I tell you, I don't trust him.
Ivan, focus,
Lucene commanded. Sorry.
The point is that Mr. Sparks was obviously traumatized. He said he'd been tortured, and if I had to guess, there's more to Cepheus's story than Tanager let on. I think he was tortured as well.
Tortured by who?
The Royals.
Who the hell are they? Lucene tapped the side of her head.
I feel as if I should know, from my time working with the IPP, but I can't remember.
You worked for IPP, Ivan stated, not questioned. Seems there's a lot we don't know about you, eh? Lucene did not respond. But why would someone want to hurt you? You seem pretty harmless to me.
I don't know, but I can't risk putting Fatima in danger. The sanctuary rooms here are empty at the moment. I figure I can hide out here for a few days until I sort things out.
Who's going to look after you, though? You should call the police.
And tell them what? That I may be an unregistered alien, but I'm not sure? And oh, by the way, people I don't know are out to get me.
Well, when you put it like that... Ivan thought for a moment. You should confide in Tanager and Cepheus. So far, they seem to know more about you than you know about yourself. He nodded, as if that settled it. Lucene paused for a moment.
Okay,
she agreed. Really? Ivan was surprised. I didn't expect you to agree with me so readily. I didn't think you trusted them.
I don't,
Lucene confessed.
Well, not entirely, I don't.
Then why would you do it?
Because I trust you, Ivan.
Ivan blushed a little.
Can you please let him know I'm here, and definitely let Fatima know that I'll be gone for a couple of days, but don't tell her where.
Aye. I don't know where Tanager is at the moment, but I will let Cepheus know. I'll also give a knock on Fatima's door.
Thanks, Ivan. You're a good friend.
She gave him a hug. Ivan blushed again as he bear-hugged her back. Well, you just stay safe. With that, Ivan made his exit, being careful that no one was watching him. At least he thought no one was watching. After Ivan left, Lucene quickly unlocked the back door to the church, and, just as quickly, locked it behind her. She made her way down a narrow hallway, passing a small bathroom and pausing at the kitchen to grab the turkey and Swiss cheese sandwich she had stored in one of the large industrial refrigerators. She grabbed the sandwich, tucked an aluminium bottle of water under one arm, and made her way toward the main congregational area. From her vantage point, she was greeted by a nearly ceiling-high stone wall in the shape of a half-moon, ornately coloured by a mural depicting scenes from the natural world. There were strategically placed wall fountains, dripping into a narrow pool that wrapped around the wall. The only break in the wall was a compact passageway, with a small cobblestone path that led to the seating area and lectern. Lucene passed along the pathway, marked at each side by 2 tall areca palms and towering stone-like seats that descended into the floor. When viewed from the front entrance, the room looked more like a sunken indoor Grecian garden with a 5-tier Colosseum seating area that formed a half-moon around a small octagon-shaped platform. The slightly raised platform was encased by 4 tall cream-coloured columns and was accessible by 2 small steps at one side. "A most unusual church you've got here, Lucy," Drake observed, standing in front of the main double doors holding what appeared to be a Canterbury picnic basket. Lucene almost dropped her dinner, peering closely at Drake in case she'd made a mistake. After all, she hadn't seen the man in over 5 years, not since the assembly. "I like what you've done with your hair." He motioned toward his own neck to reference her short pixie cut. "Though I think you look better with long blonde hair. Not that you asked, just a personal preference."
What are you doing here?
Lucene was confused. A knot in her stomach began to form, but she couldn't tell whether it was apprehension or just nerves. After all, he was her longest-standing crush, and to her annoyance, she still found him attractive. "Is that the way you greet your old boss?" He smiled. She didn't react. "Fair enough," he nodded. "The truth is I'm worried about you."
Why?
She answered. "Because you were in danger." She winced and began to protest. "It's okay, I know. I came to Florida because of an emergency meeting with the IPP. We're trying to prevent the earthlings from abducting humans and taking them back to Section 3. What I didn't realize at the time was that this human is, you." Lucene didn't answer and didn't move. "Could we sit and talk for a moment?"
Sure,
she answered finally, motioning to a seat in the Colosseum. "A most unusual church," Drake repeated absently, gazing at the seats around him.
"Oh, this is no ordinary church,"
Lucene explained, as if it needed explanation. "I can see that," Drake agreed, tapping one of the seats with his foot, surprised that it felt as if it had some give to it. Lucene spoke.
"Bioplastic seats made to look like stone, but far easier to work with and much more comfortable. Give it a try."
Drake set the basket down, stepping up to the first row and took a seat, surprised that he sank ever so slightly as he did. He leaned back and stretched his feet out.
"See?"
Lucene beamed with pride.
"Next generation memory foam seat cushions and backs."
"Interesting," was all he said. Lucene handed him the basket, her sandwich and water container before climbing up to take a seat next to him, leaving a space between them. "What do you got there?" he asked, referencing the sandwich.
"It's a clean meat turkey sandwich."
She opened the container.
"Want half?"
"Clean?" He was confused.
"Clean meat.
She explained.
It's grown from cells of animals, but no animals are harmed in the making of it. Isabella frowns on actual meat in her sanctuary."
What's her feelings on cheese and wine?" he asked, taking half the sandwich.
"Is it cruelty-free organic cheese?"
"Said so on the label."
"Then she's a fan of both."
"Excellent." Drake lifted the flaps on the basket. "This is 5 years overdue, I think." He smiled at her. Lucene's cheeks flooded with pink. "I hope a New Zealand Red Zin is okay with you?"
"Maybe just one glass. I've got to keep my wits about me."
Lucene conceded. Drake poured 2 glasses and offered Lucene one.
"Thanks,"
she said. The weird sourness in her stomach returned.
"Stupid nerves."
"A toast," Drake announced, holding up his glass. "It's taken us 5 years to finally enjoy a drink together," he joked. Lucene politely tapped his glass, not sure how to take the comment. After all, he had never in the past suggested that an after-work drink was an option. Perhaps because he was her boss at the time? "Earth to Lucy," Drake snapped his fingers in her face. She flinched in surprise.
"Sorry, I was just wondering what you know about the people who are after me. How you found me and how you plan to help."
He took a bite of his sandwich. "Tastes like turkey," he exclaimed happily.
"Well, what did you expect a turkey sandwich to taste like?"
"Well, the way you described it, tofu."
"Surprise!"
she joked. He reached back into the basket and drew out a small, ready-made plate of diced Gruyere and sliced Gouda. She plucked a slice of Gruyere and took a bite. Drake set the plate down.
"None for you?"
she asked. "Truth be told, lactose intolerant, but enjoy it. Now about your questions. Do you remember our last conversation before you, disappeared?"
"Not sure. My memory's been a little foggy lately,"
Lucene confessed. "At the time, I told you that there were forces at work. 3 to be exact. The Earth, as we know it, is changing, and there needs to be an intervention. Ring any bells?" Lucene ate another bite of cheese.
"What kind of intervention?"
"We humans are killing our own kind, destroying the planet and creating our own famine and disease in the process," he continued, ignoring the question. "Really, if left to our own devices, we will be the only species in history to make ourselves go extinct. Isn't that insane?"
"Sounds like it,"
Lucene cautiously responded. She gnawed at another piece of cheese slowly, feeling a little sluggish.
"What 3 forces are you talking about?"
"Have you been approached by someone named Cepheus Baruch? offering to take you back to Erde in Section 1 for your protection. Lucene stopped chewing. I can tell by your facial expression that I am correct. You may not remember him from the last assembly you attended, but I can assure you he cannot be trusted.
Why not?
Why not? Drake seemed perturbed by the very question, and sucked in his breath for a moment. For one thing, they have been abducting humans for years under the guise of creating safe havens for us, when in reality, all they've been doing is human experimentation for their own research.
That's one.
Lucene took a sip of wine groggily. Then there are the Vitruvians from Section 2. They claim non-interference, but will do nothing to help protect us against ourselves. But their so-called renegade band of balance keepers are all about balance when the chips are in their favor. Their idea of out of balance means what's not in our best interest.
That's two.
Lucene went back for what was now her third slice of cheese, not realizing that she'd allowed her half of the turkey sandwich to fall to the floor. The Royals. They are what we humans should have become, evolved in every way, physically and intellectually.
The ones trying to kill me.
Kill you? Drake laughed. My silly, naive Lucy. They are the only ones actually trying to help you.
How?
He peered at her closely, gently removing her wineglass from her grasp before she dropped it on the floor. By fixing you.
Fixing me?
Yes, he whispered. Don't you get it? Your poor family was a product of Section 1's experiments. Surely you sense that. Pardon me for being indelicate. You're not quite right in the head. Lucene nodded groggily and yawned.
How are they planning on fixing me?
By helping you use your slightly altered brain in an intellectually superior way.
What about emotionally and spiritually?
Lucene was going for sarcasm, but still wasn't sure where those words came from, since she never considered herself as possessing deep empathy nor a spiritual nature. A species cannot flourish being touchy-feely. There are too many predators out there just waiting to wipe us out. We're finally seeing evidence of that. And as far as spirituality, why pray to a god when you can become one? Lucene wasn't sure how she suddenly went from silly to naive to a god. She also wasn't certain when the room started revolving.
So what would you, in your infinite wisdom, recommend?
There are negotiations taking place with planets from nearby solar systems to help us restore our planet. Since many representatives from these neighboring friends have taken up residence in Florida, we decided to hold a meeting here. For once, Drake paused to gauge Lucene's reaction. Finally, she answered.
There's just one problem with all of this,
she finally blurted out. What's that? Drake clenched his jaw.
My damaged brain doesn't believe you.
Lucene slurred her words as her mouth went numb. She spit a piece of chewed cheese into her napkin, since swallowing it was not an option, and let out a cough. Drake started laughing. Easy there! He caught her by the shoulders. I'm surprised by your constitution, though. I guess I shouldn't be. Between the sleeping meds I added to the wine and the cheese, you've guzzled and eaten enough to down a horse. Lucene tried to form an unseemly response, but the words wouldn't come. Okay, she's ready, Drake announced. 2 human-sized red salamanders emerged from the shadows with a gurney in tow, and one easily lifted a drowsy Lucene to her feet. She put up a pitiful attempt at resisting, but her legs were turning to jelly. Imagine my surprise, he told her, as they lay her on the gurney and began strapping her into place, when I learned that Lucene Jones' parents were listed in the Alien International Registry that you so nicely procured for me back in New York. Lucene, vaguely conscious, recalled the files he'd asked her to find that day in his office 5 years ago.
My parents?
Lucene fought to remain awake. But not you." He looked down at her. "You weren't listed because you were born here. By the time I made the connection, you'd already run away. Do you know how many Lucene Jones there are in this country, let alone the world? Took forever to find you. And to think," he said finally, before everything faded to black, "you were right under my nose for 3 years." Drake nodded for the guards to take her away as he carefully packed up the picnic basket, pausing only to take a bite of his sandwich. "Clean meat," he laughed. "Who would have thought?"
"Who are you?"
Isabella demanded at her surprised guest in her sanctuary. Drake turned to see the striking dark-skinned woman with snow-white hair standing in the doorway. It was at that moment she caught a glimpse of a gurney and 2 red salamanders disappearing down the back hallway, pushing something. She couldn't quite see what it was. "I was just leaving," Drake replied, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small pistol. He shot Isabella through the chest before she could react. She fell to the floor in a heap. He raised his arm and set its sights for a headshot. "Mr. Cushing!" One of the guards came running back in. "Ambassador Hamish and Ambassador Sabrina are on the line. They want to know if you have the girl and when they can collect her. They are rather insistent." He looked at the lifeless body on the floor. Blood was beginning to pool from under her shirt and spill out onto the floor. "Okay." He put his gun away and dropped his sandwich on the floor, trampling it on his way out. After all, he'd be long gone before anyone could match any prints or DNA to him. 23. Spare parts. Monday evening, 5 years after the assembly. "Cepheus, we've got a situation here. I need your Ivan stopped mid-sentence as he witnessed his friend perched on his work table, pulling an assortment of washers, wing nuts, screws, and the old pair of pliers out of containers that were lined up on shelves or hanging on the wall. Neatly labelled, he noted to himself with disappointment. He had planned on filling Cepheus in about his talk with Lucene at the sanctuary moments ago, but this episode clearly needed his immediate attention. Cepheus paused to analyse a small brass gear before tucking it in the jacket pocket of his long black coat. "You okay, buddy?" Ivan asked, at which time Cepheus hissed at him, accidentally hitting his head on a hanging mason jar light that shined over the workstation. He didn't seem to notice. Cepheus, still hunkering over the table like a wild animal eating prey it had caught, continued to tear through tools and accessories, exhibiting an odd sense of pure joy at each trinket he discovered. Ivan, not usually given to unnecessary worry, watched his friend with a mix of concern and odd fascination. "I want this shiny grabber," Cepheus announced, holding up a small adjustable wrench, proud of his find. "Sure thing," Ivan answered. "Whatever you need." Cepheus nodded, as if that answer was expected and acceptable. At that moment, he hopped off the table and darted out the back door. "Where ya?" Ivan began, following Cepheus out of the shed and down the trail in the dark, stopping at a large tree stump. The remains of an oak tree that had fallen during the last major storm. Ivan repurposed it as his favourite think spot, often sitting there for an eternity until he'd solved a major problem. He watched as his friend reached his hand into a small hole that an animal had made along its side, uncertain whether that animal had been Cepheus. "Don't know that I'd reach in there. Could be brown recluses and—" He was hissed at again and fell silent as Cepheus carefully tucked his new treasures safely into the hole like an oversized ferret. He then grabbed a handful of dirt and haphazardly tossed it over the hole in a poor attempt to cover it back up. Without acknowledging Ivan, he darted back to the shed. Ivan pulled out a pocket flashlight and followed him back, more slowly this time, as the darkness seemed to fall rather rapidly over the sky. As he approached the shed, he saw car lights in the distance. He recognized them as Fatima's. One disaster at a time, he thought. He would phone her after he'd gotten Cepheus under control. It was then that he remembered the medicine that Tanager had given him should Cepheus have an episode. He ran back to the shed. Cepheus had moved onto the engine that they'd been working on and began to plug and unplug wires. "No, no, no!" Ivan swatted his friend's hands away. "Don't do that!" Cepheus's eyes wide as he instinctively shoved Ivan away. He was deceptively strong for a thin and wiry frame, and his push sent Ivan reeling over top of a custom motorcycle he'd built, sending him crashing to the concrete with the bike on top of him. Enough to pin him painfully to the ground, but not enough to puncture any organs he might need in the future. Fortunately, he'd had enough mishaps to remember to tuck his chin, so his head missed smacking against the floor. There was a pause before the pain in his spine connected to his mouth. "Ow!" he whined. Like a cat who'd been shooed away from the pantry, Cepheus promptly went back to exploring the workstation again, oblivious to Ivan's discomfort, or that he'd caused it. Just then, Ivan's cell phone rang. With some difficulty, he managed to slide a hand under the bike and into his pocket to retrieve it. 24. Odessa and Tanager. Monday evening, 5 years after the assembly. Tanager may have arrived here with some misconceptions about the current Earth attire, lingo, and customs, but he was observant and a quick study. Plus, he had Lucene to guide him. By the time he'd reached the marina, he was wearing a pair of bone-coloured weekender shorts, a coral mesh-lined fishing shirt, and river sandals. His curly locks were stuffed under the Salt Life cap he took from the closet. Sadly, since his borrowed threads belonged to a much taller and bulkier man, nothing fit quite right. Conversely, the sandals were Ivan's, and at least one size too small. Consequently, he still stuck out. He searched the water using night vision binoculars, but so far, the only things he spotted were clumps of eelgrass, several needlefish, and assorted marine debris.
"Oh, would you look at that get-up?"
A voice from the water called. Tanager lowered his binoculars, only to find Odessa was at the edge of the dock, right at his feet.
"Looking for me?"
"As a matter of fact, I was," Tanager answered seriously. Odessa floated on her back, with her breasts bobbing up and down like two boys in the water. Tanager politely looked away. "Could you float a little lower? That's very distracting."
"Get you a little hot and bothered, does it?"
"Hot? No, but it does bother me, a little." Odessa smiled and lowered herself in the water, treading so that only her head and shoulders were visible. "Thank you."
"Didn't do it for you. My nipples were getting a little chilly."
Odessa smirked. Tanager remained silent.
"So what brings you here? Did you miss me?"
"It is always nice to see you."
"Oh my God, you are such a bore."
Odessa whined.
"Always nice to see you, blah, blah, blah. Tanager, if you're ever going to truly understand Earth culture, you're going to need to learn how to be far less goddamn polite."
"I will take it under advisement, thank you," he replied as she rolled her eyes. "We're running out of time," he admonished. "I need you to tell me where the royals are, and if they have located our Earth-born data collector yet."
Hold the phone. You may be running out of time, whereas I, on the other hand, have all the time in the world.
Tanager let the phone reference go for now, with a mental note to research the expression later. "Odessa, I know you love this world. So do we. But if Sabrina and Hamish fulfill their mission, this Earth will be recycled, and I promise you it won't come back as something you will love, and it won't be a place where anyone outside of the royals will be invited." Odessa seemed to be considering this for a moment, her face crumbling in what could only be described as despair. "All living beings on this Earth will die, and this will only be the beginning."
"But I cannot interfere."
For the first time ever, Odessa seemed to be choking back something that felt like a sincere emotion.
"I can only report what I observe and deliver messages as instructed."
Then surely you can tell me.
To my people, not yours.
Tanager tapped the tip of his sandal on the dock and hung his head, willing a brilliant idea to pop into it. In what instance would her people allow her to divulge such important information? Suddenly he looked up. Morphini is a Vitruvian, is ze not? Tanager struggled with Earth's gender-neutral pronouns, finding language here incredibly difficult. Was it ze or zir? He decided on the masculine pronouns, since male was Morphini's most common form. Odessa became indignant.
Morphini is a renegade, a maverick. He's a balance keeper, but who the hell knows how he measures what balance is?
Can you tell Morphini what you know?
I suppose, but what would be the point of that?
Will you call on Morphini, please? I know he listens to you. Tell Morphini, and maybe I can convince him to tell me what I need to know.
And why would I do that?
Odessa asked, seeking validation. Because I know that this is your home more than Section 2 ever was. Odessa thought for a moment, and then tilted back her head, letting out what could only be referred to as a siren call, a melodic sound that can be adjusted to reach only certain frequencies. To Tanager, and to many, it was a beautiful sound. On Earth, however, it seemed that only animals had the ability to hear and appreciate it. It took several minutes, but eventually Morphini floated in as a butterfly and transformed into his masculine self.
Well, don't you look handsome?
Odessa flirted. I chose this form when I saw whose company you were keeping. Morphini flashed a glance at Tanager. I sense he is uncomfortable with the female form.
Is that true, Tanager?
Odessa winked.
Do women make you uncomfortable?
Please, Odessa, there is no time, Tanager answered. Odessa shrugged. A small fishing boat could be seen approaching the dock. This might not be the best place to talk. Is there some place more private we can go?
Absolutely.
Odessa winked. With that, she used her arms to hoist herself onto the dock, as her fins transformed into legs. And yes, she was completely naked. Follow me, she said, unabashed. A moment later, she turned and held her finger to her lips for silence, before shape-shifting into a blue-green butterfly. She nodded for Morphini to do the same. Tanager, with no such capabilities, merely struggled to follow their errant path. Eventually, the three had relocated to a small storage unit inside a large abandoned warehouse. The two Vitruvians resumed their former appearances. This time, however, Odessa was wearing a strange, grass-like skirt. Tanager eyed it curiously.
Oh, it's attached,
she confirmed.
You can touch it if you want.
She licked her lips. Tanager's face flushed. I don't have time for... Morphini began to complain.
Fine, fine, fine,
Odessa sighed. She pointed an upturned palm toward Tanager.
Speak,
she commanded. Just as Tanager was about to explain to Morphini why he was summoned, voices could be heard echoing in the distance, but very much in the same warehouse as they were. Odessa's eyes grew wide in mock amazement, as if to say,
well, would you look at that?
The voices belonged to none other than Hamish and Sabrina, and they were talking, not quietly, about Lucene. The three listened with interest.
Do you really believe he has her?
Hamish asked, tiredly.
If he doesn't, he will very soon. I'm out of patience, and we need to get out of here tonight before the entire SWAT team arrives, or whatever it is they're calling it these days.
I suppose it didn't help that you blew up a casino, Hamish responded nonchalantly.
Shut up, you idiot.
She pointed a clawed finger at her husband's throat.
I don't need a lecture from you about how bad my temper is, and you shouldn't anger me in my...
She caught herself.
You shouldn't anger me.
But where are they leaving from?
Tanager whispered. Odessa pressed her fingers to Tanager's mouth. and shook her head as a sign to be quiet. Just then, Tanager's watch gave off a warning chime, along with an accompanying red light.
What was that?
Sabrina looked up.
Nice going,
Odessa whispered, and she and Morphanai transformed back into butterflies and headed for the rafters. Tanager frantically silenced his watch and hid behind what looked like a few cobwebbed-covered bourbon barrels and hoped for the best. Moments later, Hamish replied,
I'm sure it's nothing, but we should take cover just in case.
Cover turned out to be the very storage unit where Tanager was hiding.
I can't believe we're reduced to hiding like vermin,
Sabrina complained. They were just about to shut the door when Odessa appeared, this time wearing a blue-green suit that was clearly another shape-shifting maneuver. It appeared as if she actually were wearing clothes.
Knock, knock,
She smiled, standing in the entryway.
Sorry if I startled you just now, sovereigns. What do you want?
Sabrina clutched her clothing as if trying to hide her embarrassment.
My superiors were just alerting me to confirm that your meeting with them will commence as scheduled tomorrow. Yes, of course.
Sabrina nodded.
Excellent.
Odessa turned to go.
How did she know we were here?
Sabrina asked her husband.
She's one of the observers. No doubt she notices everything. Good thing we're leaving tonight.
Tanager remained motionless until he was fairly certain they had left. Still, he knew that running would appear suspicious. Instead, after darting out of the storage room, he sauntered over to the docks as if he owned the place. It was only when at a safe distance that he picked up speed. The alert he received meant that Cepheus was undergoing trauma again. But what kind? He couldn't determine.